Hi, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Life. I'm your host, Bernadette McDaniel. I want you to like, share, and subscribe, and our super chat is open. Tonight, we have researcher and author Anna Maria Manalo. So let's welcome her to the show.
Hi, Bernadette.
Hi, Anna. How are you?
Great to be here. Happy
Oh,
Friday.
it's wonderful to have you. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you being up this late, too. Thank you.
That's fine.
So, if you want to tell our audience a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you.
Oh, okay. I write in the genre of horror. They're usually nonfiction paranormal, and I base my stories on people that I have interviewed. In the past, I traveled quite a bit. I did a lot of travel photography, and I met a lot of people, both from meeting tourists as well as locals. Um, a lot of times what happens is I end up, sitting at a hotel or maybe just relaxing somewhere while on a tour, and I meet up with other people. We end up sharing a meal. It's kind of like one of those campfire type of situations where you're just all relaxing after a very busy day. And they start kind of like asking me, what do you do, et cetera, et cetera. And I tell them I collect stories. And I must have that kind of face that says, you can tell me anything. And before you know it, they start telling me stories about strange events that have happened to them. So I've collected quite a bit of that. And recently, I actually started writing about maybe 4 years ago. And I compiled a book called Portal. And Portal has not just my own personal story, but also stories of UFO sightings and encounters, which I collected from my days when I was with the Mutual UFO Network. But it went from there, like I said before, I started traveling all over the world. And so I also collected a lot of stories about people's encounters with ghosts, disembodied spirits. It led me to finally sit down and write a second book. Um, and that is with publisher Beyond the Fray. And so I started writing memoirs that were novel length. And then from there, started writing compilations of events with haunted objects. So it's been quite a voyage. From my own personal experience with ghosts and a demonic entity, um, to actually now I'm currently writing my fifth book. I just released my fourth one called Unholy Structure.
Right, which we're going to talk about tonight, which was an excellent book. You gave me the chance to review it and read it, and it was amazing. It was very scary. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about that book?
Yes, please. It's interesting how I don't know if I ever told you how I actually started writing a book of this nature.
No.
I was just about done with the previous book. And on Facebook, I meet a lot of people. And one of them was a gentleman who was riveted by Haunted Heirlooms, which was the previous book that just went into press, just went to the
Which is a
publisher.
fabulous book too.
Yeah, yeah. And actually was interested in having one of his cases written, in book format. And he went through a number of cases. This is a gentleman who is working out of Harrisburg. His name is John Curley. He was the founder of the Harrisburg Area Paranormal Society. They're pretty active. They have a pretty hefty caseload. They've been around for over 20 years. And he had compiled so many cases under his belt, some really, really unusual infestations in private homes, in hotels, things of that nature. We went through about probably 4 cases that he's had. The first case he actually mentioned to me, I kind of refrained from writing simply because it was an active case, but also because I tend to be a little bit on the sensitive side. And what I mean by that is in trying to pick material for a next book, I try to gauge a sense of, where the story is going. But number two, how I feel as the story is unfolding, being recounted to me. In the first situation, the first case he shared with me, which was also an infestation and a possible possession, I started feeling very cold in the room as we were talking. This is a gentleman that's probably about 2 hours away from me. And as he was telling me by phone the story of this case, the temperature in the room started to plummet.
Oh, wow.
I also started feeling, I don't know if the word is dizzy. I was not feeling well. And so I decided to decline. So John and I talked again a couple of weeks later to look for another case. And this is when the case of what you see now called Unholy Structure was brought to my attention. And this one was a case that was, well, I would say it was closed, but it was left unresolved. And for people who haven't read the book yet, I'm not going to put a spoiler in there, but suffice it to say, this was, as the title says, it very unholy. It had a number of manifestations of some very earthbound spirits.
It did.
And so,
I mean, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say that, yeah, it did. From reading it, like in the very first, when you first get into the book, like a workman is actually, he sees a phantom dog. Like it is the most spookiest thing. And I mean, it seems right from the beginning, the house is just, making itself known. The spirits in the house are making itself known. So go ahead, continue. Yeah. I'm sorry to have interrupted.
Well, that you have a good point there, because from the get-go, the workmen who were trying to renovate, and this home is a mansion. We're talking about a home that had 20 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms. It had a ballroom. It was pretty sizable. And in its day, it must have been a pretty beautiful and very grand house. Everything that was inside the house was practically an antique because it was built in the 1850s, 1750s, I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember now the salient facts because it's been a while since I wrote it. But from what I understand, the house changed hands a number of times because every time they attempted to bring a crew of people in there, they left with very short notice. A lot of them would not work after hours. Once the sun started to set, they would literally dash out of there. And we're talking about burly workmen who were used to, they're not the kind that would just kind of like run off. They've had so many encounters that are pretty frightening. They've lost sleep. These people have lost man hours, even though you offer them overtime. And through the 5 years, there have been at least 3 crews of construction people that have attempted to renovate this house. And at one time, our understanding after the history was delved into, one time the house was actually an inn during stagecoach days. And during that time frame, there was a number of people that passed through. One of them was a gentleman that appeared to me to be involved as a trapeze artist way back when there were circuses that traveled. This gentleman was one of those people who would walk the high wire. He is a central figure in the haunting of this house. There are a number of people whose lives he has affected, and he has caused a lot of violence and tragedy to occur to this particular house when it was an inn. So I think a lot of history of violence made this particular, and I'll call it a mansion because that's what it is, made this particular mansion the way it is today.
Mhm. I agree. And like you said, that it was so bad that no matter how much money the workers were offered, they didn't want to stay. Like I said, in the very first couple pages with the guy saying the phantom dog, he's even like, the pay is good. It's not a bad place. Why is no one,
Mm-hmm.
why does no one else really want to be here? I'll take the money, until he realizes, why no one wants to be there.
Yeah.
It's amazing how bad it really had gotten. And you say that there was like a lot of antiques in there as well. Oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. But the frustrating part about this is that the work people apparently had convinced or tried to convince the owners of this mansion of what was happening. And for some reason, they kept tossing it off. One of the owners just called it noises. They were hearing noises. When John came upon the case, there was already 3 crews that have already left. They were working on the 4th crew. And the crew that he came upon, who had a construction manager whom he met, he was actually just there for about a week. And he had already heard all kinds of stories from the current crew and the past crew that just departed. Of that crew, only one person had stayed, and that was the gentleman at the beginning of the book. I think that he probably was the more courageous of all the people that were there, because despite his encounters, he kept coming back. I think he needed the money enough that he needed to go back to complete the work. But even during this particular investigation, there were a lot of crew members who, things happened to them that you never think would happen, just by virtue of walking into the room and taking away something. And Bern, and
Right.
historically, when you renovate a house, anytime you disrupt something, whether you repaint it or maybe take away the furniture, replace the floor, anything like that, my understanding is that it causes an upheaval, so the spirits come out. And I think that's what's
And
happening in this mansion.
and that's a question from Vincent. He said, "Do you think the renovations have made the activity more active?"
Yeah, it definitely did. I think from one set of crew people to another set of crew people, walking in and out of there, banging on the walls, redoing the wallpaper. It just really dredged up whatever was already dormant in there. It's kind of like, you've got sleeping dogs, let them lie. In this case, they all awakened.
And you even had someone from the crew like steal something, and the house in a way kind of punished that crew member for
Yes.
stealing. I believe it was a Chase Lounge that he
Yeah.
had stolen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when John was telling me the story of this, and we talked a series of times, almost, I would say, every week, as I was trying to form the story, the through line for this book. And as I was
Yeah.
trying to write the outline, and I'm not much for outline, sometimes I just, put together all the accounts and make it events. He would call me or text me and say, I forgot to tell you this. This happened as well. Oh, I forgot to tell you before that happened, this happened as well. And one of the things he told me was the gentleman who was in charge of cleaning up the attic. Now, the real house, the attic went from one end of the building to the other. So you could just imagine how cavernous that is. So that by the time you get to the center, and to make matters worse, there was no electricity. So they were relying on generators.
Oh,
And at one point, one of the
yeah.
crew members forgot to put gas in the generator, and it started to become dark, and they were using lanterns. So the attic guy, who at the beginning apparently was trying to work by himself, had some lights upstairs in the attic, and he came off as being very kind of like, he's got a lot of machismo. He's got this swagger, and he's, chewing his gum and thinking, I'm going to make a lot of money. I'm going to be doing all kinds of overtime in the weekends, and I can pay off my bills and my credit card. He didn't know anything at all, because they were not going to tell him. They would never come in if they had been told. And he's
Right.
not the type that believes in these kinds of things anyway. He's a young guy, kind of spunky. He walks in there, he starts clearing up the stuff. And his main thing that he had to do was make sure that the antiques were taken to one side of the attic, and obviously to load them into a truck so that they can take them to consignment shops and, antique stores where they could be sold. I guess, when you have something this huge, a building like this, it goes through generations of furniture. And as with people in regular houses, stuff they no longer want or use ends up in the attic or in the basement. In this case, it was in the attic. There were two sets of stairs. One was at the front of the house, and that was the stairs that was usually used by guests, people who were using it to stay overnight, the inn guests. And at one time, the people who owned the home used that. And then there was the set of back stairs, which also went all the way up to the attic. And these were the steps that were used by servants, by the kitchen people. And so it was often, tucked away in a more obscure part of the building. So this gentleman came up through the front where it was well lighted. And as he went deeper into the building, deeper into the attic, it got darker and darker. And that's when things start to take a turn, because in darkness, a lot of things happen in this particular
Right.
mansion. And yes, and he really, some things caught his fancy. He saw an object that he really liked, and he decided he was going to plan on taking it home. He was just going to pick it up and take it home. But then he got greedy, and he decided no one was looking. There was only this. Later on, he was helped by the elderly gentleman, and he decided he was going to take a chair. And things start to take
Which was
a
a
turn.
mistake.
Yeah, major, big mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in a way that from reading how you had written the book and how it sounded, in a way the spirits did enjoy tormenting the work crew in a way, it seemed like.
Yeah, they were playing with them. And the strange thing about it is that it seemed to be controlling what they can record. It was going to show them and scare them and mimic people that they were working with. But it gave them very little evidence that they could actually tape when they went back to the house where they were, they were clustered together in a staging area. It was almost like they were so frustrated. They sat through 3 hours of EVP recording. They sat through all kinds of camera monitors, and don't understand why what they saw or experienced was not being recorded. So this was a very, very nefarious, I guess is the word that comes to mind, a very nefarious house. And it manipulated what they saw. It manipulated people they thought they heard. John also was short-staffed at the time. He had a couple of people he was training. They were new. So he got his wife involved. His daughter wanted to be involved. His wife volunteered instead. And she ended up manning the van that was just right outside the mansion. And she had the CCTV going. She had all the monitors sitting on two sides of the table on the counter inside the back of the van. She was safely locked back there, but then she had her own set of experiences in the van.
Yeah. And John had also heard a voice that sounded like his wife inside the house. It was, I think, the very first night he was in there, if I'm not mistaken. So it did. I mean, it seemed like it was very, like it just toyed with everybody who came in. And you said that before that, they were moving stuff in the attic to send it out to consignment shops and antique shops and things like that. I mean, and from what John had said, like, he didn't even want to take a paper cup from this place. He didn't want to take anything, if he, any trash, if he could help it. He didn't want to take anything towards the end. So do you think that any of those objects that did get sold, do you think there was any attachment to them?
That could be the case, because I think one of the things that people have to remember is that when a place is disinfested, anything that any of those people in life had used that somehow was still attracted to them in death, or still had their energy. We all have energy. And when we have strong emotions that are negative, or there was something violent that happened, and you see that all the time in places where there's violence, like where we both are near Gettysburg. There's a lot of violence in those fields. They leave their energetic imprint. So it might not be so much that there's a ghost attached to it, but you're going to experience something really bizarre. If you choose to take an object, any antique, you always run the risk that there could be some negative energy, some dark energy attached to it, depending on, who owned it, or maybe, if there was anything violent that happened around it, that energy could still be attached to that particular antique.
And when I read that, I was very shocked that they were, knowing all this was going on, that they were selling this stuff. I'm just kind of like, wondering where all this stuff happened to end up, and who got it, and if they're experienced anything. That would be a great story as well.
Yeah.
I do have a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
So Marla wants to know, do you feel that some of the spirits can be attached to land versus the house?
Well, in this particular case, the spirits both inside the house, there were spirits attached to the house, but there were also some that were attached to the land. And the reason for that is that there was a lot of history surrounding this land, probably even before the house was built. And to make even matters worse, there's a cemetery several yards near the house. There was an electrician who was scoping the house for, putting down cable for power, because the neighborhood was so outdated. And I mean, it was really just left neglected. And there was a cemetery that seemed like it was also neglected, kind of like just left there. And there was a wall, and the wall had crumbled. And the gentleman was very curious. He wanted to know how far he had to go out into the street in order to lay cable. So in his first evening, and they never thought not to work late. They figured, hey, I'm alone. I can still work. And they encountered some stuff on the land and also in the cemetery right next door.
My goodness. Didn't in the book you had said that they had encountered a werewolf, basically, or
Well,
at least there was something that looked like a werewolf.
yeah, John didn't know what that was, and I think the first thing I thought of was that it was a werewolf. There were some people that thought it was a werewolf. There were some people that thought it was a dogman. I guess because we really don't know what they look like. We really don't know how it originated. Whatever it was pretty big. Whatever it was, I think was multidimensional. I don't think it was flesh and blood per se, because it kind of would just disappear. And it came around the area of the cemetery. So when the electrician was out there, not to give away everything, but when he was out there, he encountered whatever this thing was. And he was just terrified. He ran over to the truck, quickly drove around, and in the process, he also encountered orbs in the back of the mansion, up on top. They were kind of like just flying
There was
up.
a lot of them.
Yes. And, when it's interesting when you see something paranormal, and I've heard this before in many different discussions and read them in a number of books. One of them that comes to mind that recently was talked about in another podcast was how some people witnessed Bigfoot. And in the same night that they see Bigfoot, they see orbs, or they see something, lights in the sky that they can't explain. So the only conclusion I can have is that perhaps they're linked. Somehow you're not looking at, the camp of people who explore ghosts, people who investigate UFOs, people who look at cryptids like Bigfoot, but they're actually one continuum of phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
They're all from a different. I'm sorry, go ahead.
But they're all together. Oh, sorry. Do you think that how the house was, or how bad the house was, or how bad the land was, what drew that wolf, dogman, whatever it is? Do you think that's what drew it there? Like all that energy from the house and the land?
I think negative energy draws negative energy. I think that every time there's violence that happens to people, it opens a tear in the fabric. I've always thought that when someone dies prematurely by the hand of someone else, or maybe due to a fire, like in the case of this inn, there was a fire in the back. When people's lives are cut short, I think that is enough because of their negative emotion and the violence of the event, that you end up with these kinds of entities and these kinds of dark energies that kind of just start really getting attracted to all that. I think every time people are afraid, it draws the attraction of these dark energies, these entities.
And they just tend to feed on it too, as well. That's
Yes.
what I think. Because it seems like the fear, everyone being afraid of what's going on in there, it made everything stronger.
Yes.
That's how, when I was reading it, I got that feeling that it kept egging them on. Like, well, if you're afraid of this dog, well, then this is also what we're going to do, because, hey, we know you're afraid of us. And So Nancy asked, do you think the floor plan of the mansion might have caused some of the problems with the ghosts?
So that's an interesting question. It sounds like something having to do with what they call feng shui. And I don't know. I've actually physically never visited the mansion. I know exactly where it's located. I had to obscure it because at the time I was writing the book, I had asked John for permission from the owners to share a photograph because he had sent me a photograph, and to just kind of disclose a little bit about where the town is. But because they have sold it once again, he had no contact with them whatsoever, and the case was officially
Mhm.
closed. After he had given them recommendations, and you should know this, in light of the antiques that are in there, and the number of casualties that were found on the site, he really did not want that to be a location for an inn. It sounded more like something where they needed the church to enter and at the minimum bless it. It also needed to be recognized by the local historical society to preserve it and leave it alone. And I think that's what's essential here. Everything that's within that structure is basically screaming, leave us alone, don't renovate us.
Yeah.
So the worst thing that could happen to it is for someone to actually attempt to convert it into another dwelling. Whether they followed it or not, we don't know to this day. He he pressed upon them that it was a historic landmark and not to touch the ground because of the number of bodies that were buried.
And that my next question was going to be, do you know what happened after he sold it? If the new owners, or after they sold it, if the new owners have done anything, or have they tried to finish, remodeling?
He doesn't know. John has moved on to a different case within weeks, actually, of when the book finished, because his team always has a long roster. They just moved on because at this point, the new owner, from what I understand, wasn't receptive to any other visits or anything like that. The previous one was already resistant to the idea and hired them, I think, at the kind of like as a last resort because they really didn't want the crew to stop. They wanted an explanation so that they can then make the right decision about holding on to the property.
Yeah.
So there has not been any contact from what I understand.
That would be interesting to know what was going on. If they did anything or they've tried, that would be.
Yeah.
Nike Snow wants to know, he made a comment, I went to a graveyard once and saw two girls covered in white face paint and carrying a big bag. Any thoughts, guys?
Two girls carrying a big
Covered.
bag.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
Were they shadows or were they full body apparitions? Did she come towards them and interact with them? It's hard to predict what they are and what they're carrying. I mean, if we're assuming that they're ghosts, they're probably apparitions of two people that somehow had a history having to do with that cemetery, and whatever they're carrying, I don't want to know what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Vincent wants to know, why do antiques carry spirits to new locations?
I don't know that all antiques do. I would say it's a misnomer to assume that every antique has some kind of haunted history. And I will say this on behalf of antique dealers that I have known through years and years of their businesses. It is very rare to come upon an antique that has some kind of an attachment. And there's two kinds of antiques out there. If they do have some type of energy attached to them, it could actually be haunted by person that used to be alive because they loved it and treasured it and want to keep it for themselves. Or it could just be what you would call a cursed object. And the difference there is that the person who used to own it is not necessarily attached or traveling with the object, but they have put in some kind of energy into it so that, I guess a concrete example would be like the Hope Diamond. Anybody who wears it is strangled or ends up in some type of nasty event, violent event. The person that owned it before in life is not following the Hope Diamond, but they put their energy into it so that bad things happen to the next owner. So, but not all of them. It's very rare. The previous book I had before Unholy had to do with 4 antique dealers that I knew over the years. And they only disclosed to me the haunted objects after having known them for quite a long time. And I still don't disclose who they truly are or where they're truly located for that reason, because 2 of them are still in business. But it's, I would say, probably only 2% or 3% at a time.
Yeah. In your last book was wonderful. I also got a chance to read that as well. So that was a wonderful book. And if anyone hasn't read that yet, they need to go and read it. So we're going to plug that book too. But do you honestly think that maybe it's with the house, it's a combination of the land is not only cursed in the way, but it's also the spirits, like it's a combination, because it seems cursed too on top of everything.
You mean the forest nearby?
Yes.
Yeah. I wondered about that. Because I am not a paranormal investigator per se. I only research the history, and I take whatever history is shared with me, as in the case of this book. I don't know. I have been told by a couple of people that I am a sensitive, that I can sense. I do tend to see things like when I walk into a house. Some people might not feel anything or see anything. I tend to be the first one to see something. So I guess if I were to actually go out there in those woods, I probably might see something. There's only been 1 or 2 people that's included in this book that have actually witnessed something come out of those woods. One of them was John. The other one is the electrician. But to what extent it's haunted, who knows? It's just one of those places that just seems like it's just infested.
Yeah. Vincent asks, can you tell us about your experience with winged humanoids, if you have any?
I don't know that I want to call it a winged humanoid per se, but if everybody can recall the movie Mothman Prophecies that had Richard Gere in it, or even more recently the movie Jeepers Creepers, that had, to me, a very terrifying humanoid. When I was a child, and this goes back to the 60s when I was only an infant, my father witnessed a winged humanoid. And it looks uncannily, very much so, like what they depicted in Mothman and Jeepers Creepers. The face of it, and this is all according to my mother because I was too young, had the face of a goat, had the eyes of a cow, and that visage, I still see that even in my dreams. So somewhere in my unconscious, I must have seen it as a child. I know that it has red eyes. That creature stands about anywhere from 7 to 9 feet tall, and the wingspan goes 6 feet. and it clung to the window of my father's study. And it would appear there, it would unfold out of a huge tree that was near the window and latch itself to the window. So that is the one creature I do recall being discussed in our home when I was growing up.
What do
My
you think it
mother,
wanted? I'm sorry.
I think it wanted one of two things. It wanted to win over a soul that it considered to be very pure. It also wanted to challenge God, because we always thought it was evil, that it was demonic, that it could take the soul away from God. Um, Later on, when my family consulted the clergy, and we did try to get the clergy to come into this house that we were in to bless that particular room, the priest fled. He couldn't handle it. He went into the room and, without saying any more, turned around and said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave. I need to leave." That's what he told
Wow.
my mother and my grandmother. And he ran,
Mhm.
literally ran down the stairs from what I was told, and never came back.
Wow. That's pretty bad then. That really is. I mean, if yeah, because there
Yeah.
was he trained? Was he specially trained to do this then?
You know, it's weird because I think that recently I heard that there's more and more exorcists and people that are trained to do this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to make a plug for this because I admire this particular organization. The Warren Foundation, run by Chris McKinnell, trains exorcists, and they help people for free to go into their homes and actually do and perform an exorcism. Another paranormal investigation team that works out of Kansas, the First City Paranormal of Kansas, also does a very thorough investigation, totally free. Their only objective is to help. At the time when this infestation was happening, I don't know that there were any paranormal groups out there. So you had to rely on reaching out to the parish priest. Most of them did not know what to do, or maybe were reluctant to even get involved. Um, and it's an interesting thing because this country has a lot of hauntings. It is probably the most haunted
Yeah.
country in Asia. Yes, it happened in the Philippines.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Wow, that's scary, especially because I, as a parent, thinking that how you said you were little at the time, having a little child, that's scary. I mean,
Mhm.
I can relate to that. We were talking off air, but you know what's going on here, so I could totally relate to that. So Nancy Malcolm wants to know: have you ever dreamed of seeing a ghost in a place where you had to investigate prior to your dream?
I have investigated some interesting hotspots, and it's more out of curiosity rather than investigation. I actually flew back to the Philippines to visit some relatives, and they told me about a university gym, of all places, that was only about maybe 15 minutes away from their home. This particular gym, apparently during World War II, was a place where they interred POWs. The Japanese took over the university and they tortured people in this gym. So you could just imagine the negative energy that just found a home. And we're talking a gym that has a stage in front, that has an extensive basement where they keep the equipment. It's got tennis courts on the second floor. It's got a basketball court, everything. And people will say, the students told me that on a given night, if you stay back a little later than you should, if you look at the stage area in the dimness of the dark, you will see Jesuit priests marching in a circle, and they were all beheaded.
Oh, yeah, I
And
don't think I'd want to be there.
yes, and the interesting part about this, to answer the question, sometimes I have dreams of these things before I actually see them. So I don't know what that's about, whether it's precognition. Um, I I don't know. And sometimes I dream about them afterwards, and it probably is because it just made an impression on me.
Did you have any experiences while writing this book?
While writing Unholy, thank goodness no. I have to say
I
though that
was gonna say, I wonder.
sometimes when we've had conversations where John would tell me, something that he had forgotten had happened, and he would talk about one particular. I'm trying to think of whether it had something to do with what they saw in the cemetery. And it might have been something that was found on the ground. Shortly after I hung up the phone, it was starting to get dusk, and we had said goodbye after talking for about an hour. I went outside to get the dogs, and the first thing I thought I saw on the ground as I was coming out around to the back of the house what looked like a long dog bone. So that kind
Oh
of
my
freaked
gosh.
me. It does
I
play
know
with your
what you're
head.
talking about, so
It's
I freak out too.
yeah, and when you're writing, you're basically alone unless you choose to write in a coffee house. But then, even
Mhm.
then, you're so concentrated that you really don't hear the sounds or anything else around you. And one of the things that I decided I would do with these type of books is never to write at night. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of times I wake up early in the morning and I start writing. I let the dogs out, have my coffee, and then I start writing. And I look up again and realize I hadn't fed them. It was already 11 o'clock in the morning. So, but I
And they're
try
probably
not to
sitting
write.
there looking at you like, why didn't you
Yeah,
feed us? What are you doing?
they're looking right through the door because they're still outside. So,
Right?
but one of the things with these types of books is that it does play with your head sometimes. Another thing it does is that if you're finishing a chapter and there was a lot of activity in that particular chapter that I'm writing, at least for me, when I go to bed, the story starts unfolding in my head. And then I go back and I look at my notes and I think to myself, okay, I must have read it, which is why I knew that that was the next thing that was going to happen.
Mhm.
So that has happened to me where it starts going into my dreams. And that's when I take a step back.
And I would not I would not read this book in the dark. I would just keep the light on while I was reading it because it's heart pounding. The way you write, you put the reader right in the situation. I mean, if
Yeah.
it's scary. Like I was reading it and I'm just like, oh my god, I don't want to be in this house anymore. I mean, it's very heart pounding. I mean,
Well, thank you.
I was scared. I'm not gonna
That,
lie. I mean, you are a very good writer. You are very
thank
good,
you.
but
Thank you. That was my intention. And I think I got that from having, worked before as a script writer, because you have to find a way to transport the person who's reading or watching the movie to where you are and to have them feel the way you feel. One of the things that I refuse to write about are people who are at sea because I can't swim. And so I'm thinking to myself, do I really want to immerse myself because in order to be able to transport the reader, by writing it the way I write, I also transport myself into it.
Right.
I get that close to the material so that I'm actually reliving what John is telling me. And it can be terrifying if you choose to write it at night. So, and that's why I don't write ghost stories of things that happen at sea, because, then I'm out there. Then it
Yeah.
becomes truly terrifying, at least for
Right.
me.
No, I can understand that. And like I said, you put the reader right in there, and that to me is the best type of book, where you're right in there with either, like, if it's a fiction book with the character, but if it's nonfiction, where you're right in there, like you feel like you're basically right next to John on the investigation, or next to like the worker when it's happening with the dog. Because I mean, it was, I was, like I said, I was terrified, but you are a wonderful writer. You really are. So
Thank
I'm
you.
excited to read your next book. I really am. Marla wants to know, have you ever seen a full-bodied apparition?
Yes, I have actually. I've seen quite a number of them. One was a gentleman who obviously starved during World War II. It was the apparition of a Japanese soldier who was wearing tattered clothing. He was very gaunt, very pale. He had leaped over some kind of structure. And in the present time, it was my grandmother's house, and it was the gate. So it was going on around twilight, and I hear what sounded like flip-flops hit the edge of the top of the gate. The gate was about 6 feet high. And whoever it was leaped over it, and then you could hear his slippers hit the ground, the driveway in this case. And I looked up, and there he was. He looked right at me, and then he started running. And his clothes were tattered. He looked like he was so exhausted. He looked like he was at his very end of his life. He was just gaunt, starved.
That's heartbreaking. That really is. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Vincent wants to know, what paranormal experiences have you had?
I've had quite a bit as a child. Because of the episode with my father, where we saw that Mothman-like creature, it seemed like it went from there, because we moved to my grandmother's house. The house was accidentally built, I should say, on soil that had bones of Japanese soldiers. They did not remove them. They didn't know they were there. And apparently the entire neighborhood was a battlefield at some point in World War II. And they just built homes on top of it. And on a given night, you would see someone walking. They were still carrying a rifle. They would still wear a helmet. There is one in the middle of my first book, Portal. I have a series of photographs there that people might be interested in looking at it. You'd have to buy the hardcover. You can't buy the ebook version because it doesn't show. But in one of them, you will see a window. And at the edge of the window, where there's no ledge, there's a Japanese soldier's helmet. And the window in real life, I did see, and I opened the window to check myself. There's no ledge and there's no helmet.
Wow. It just showed up in the photograph like that.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And it's pretty clear. People think, oh, yeah, the helmet must be sitting there. It's been sitting there for ages. And you open the window. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to sit it on. There's no ledge.
Wow. Do you think these type of places, or like, your grandmother's house, or even the house in the Unholy structure, the houses themselves tend to retain the memories, and in a way, take on a living owner for their own way, aside from what's going on, if that makes sense. Like in the photograph, like you said, there was a windowsill. So do you think,
Mm-hmm.
It was, maybe there was one at one time and it was just a memory,
mm-hmm.
if that makes
Well,
sense?
they always said, it does. They always said that every time there's a strong emotion that a person feels, that emotion is recorded uh, somewhere in an ether, in some kind of record. And it's replayed over and over again until that energy dissipates. It has the capacity of being photographed, as it did with this particular case. And cameras have an uncanny ability to also photograph dark energy from apparitions. Because in this same photo, there's an armoire that had been there since the house was built. The house was built in, I think it was like 1856.
Mhm.
You look through the mirror, and a lot of people who buy the book say, I see it. I see her right there, right in the mirror. I see her looking out. I am one of few that, as much as I look at that photo and I have the actual photograph, I cannot see that woman in the mirror. But a lot of people will describe it to me. I even posted it one time on social media, and a lady who was just, I guess, a follower circled it for me and said, there she is. That's how she looks. And I still
Mhm.
couldn't see it.
Wow. I wonder why. I wonder why it's like appearing to other people and not you.
Yeah, yeah. And I tend to
That's
be
very.
sensitive, but I
Mhm.
don't think they're joking with me or anything like that, Bernadette, because there's so many of them that tell me the same thing. And then I showed it to a couple of friends, and they
Mhm.
pointed it out without being prompted. I just said to them, I've got pictures inside the book, right on the spine. Take a look at them. And they
Mhm.
looked at them and they saw the helmet, and then they saw the woman right through the mirror in the armoire. So there must be
Wow.
something to it.
No, there really must be, unless there's, like how antiques are, and they can pick up living, like traces or memory traces. Maybe the picture does, and maybe it has like something within it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just trying to hide itself from you, or it. That's very interesting that you can't see it. I really find that interesting. I wonder if there's anyone else who have said, well, they don't see it either. Have you had
Yeah,
that?
it's strange because like people who normally don't see things saw
Hmm.
the stuff in this particular picture. When I visited, I actually went to this house because I was very intrigued about the armoire for one, the window for another. There's other haunted rooms in this house, but I chose to walk into that one, and I wasn't alone. I won't lie to you. I
No,
kind
I
of get
don't blame
scared
you.
of these kinds of places. I had my cousin with me, and
Hmm.
he said I could see her from here. He said to
Oh
me as
wow.
I'm standing there
Hmm.
facing the mirror, looking into it. He was right behind me, and he said I could see her from where I'm standing. And of course, I got goosebumps all over me, not because I
Yeah.
saw something, but because of what
Uh-huh.
he said. So I turned
Yeah.
around and left the room.
Oh my goodness. Well, you brought him because you should just put him in front of you and been like, take him instead. That's why you bring
Hmm.
the extra person. But no, I mean that's chilling. That really is. Right. That's
Hmm.
that's what I would do. Trust me, that's what I would do. I'm not going to lie to you. But no,
Run away.
that's very chilling because
Yeah, yeah,
no, I would bring the other person and be like, here, take them, and then make my escape the best I could. That's but no, I think that is chilling that you can't see it, but yeah, he's standing there like there she, and that
yeah,
happens from what I know and from what I've heard in some of the winged humanoid cases. Like there's a whole group of people and only one person sees it, and the rest of the group doesn't see it.
yes,
So it's like
yeah,
picking and choosing who's going to see it and who doesn't see it, and
yeah.
that's fascinating as well. My Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I was just going to add something, but it has nothing to do with this. It's about the next book. And
Oh no.
involves humanoids. The next book does have humanoids in it. It's kind of like a very strange case where people can't classify exactly what they're seeing. So that's coming up in the spring. And at this point, it's not even titled yet. I don't have a title for the book. I'm still busy talking to both the people who are going to be the backbone of the book.
But you have been posting teasers on Instagram. I saw your teasers on Instagram, so you have been posting teasers, which I've been seeing them, and I'm just like, I need to read this book. So you have those on Instagram. So if you look on her Instagram, you will see them. But I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Before we let you go, going back to Unholy Structure, do you believe that the spirits in the house, they're aware? They're not just, memories. They're not just, repeats on the loop, but they're fully aware of what's going on.
I think they are. I think they are, and I believe John believes that as well, because they are interacting with the living. There's a woman in particular who has said some things to him when he was alone. There is an evil in the house that is the center point of all these hauntings, and he has them trapped in there. He actually confronted John at some point in the bathroom, and that's when John started really feeling that there was something that was very malevolent that had caused all the destruction. This house had a fire, and a lot of people also passed away because of the fire. And they attributed, before they did any research, they attributed some of the fire was caused by this gentleman.
And I think, unless it's, so one more question. So
yeah,
in the beginning of the book, when, before John takes the case, is it fair to say that John might have somebody or an entity attached to him because his wife had saw something?
I think there was a fear that it was coming home with him. There was a situation where she was actually outside. It was pouring rain, and she was collecting clothes from the clothesline before they got wet. And whatever it was I think it was trying to do something to electrocute her. Oh, so she started getting the feeling that there was something that was following him home. And in the beginning of the book, she had a feeling that there was something that followed her she was a nurse, followed her to the hospital, and was manifesting itself there. So the first question she had was from the previous case, do you think that someone followed you home? Because I looked at a picture you showed me, and the picture was like the gentleman I saw at the hospital.
Yeah. And
so
then he had go ahead.
No. So so he had an experience with the case that I chose not to write about. That I think that's where it was coming from, honestly, because I recall he had just ended that case, and I declined to write about it because I couldn't see myself spending a lot of hours on an open case where there was a danger that whatever it was going to attach itself to people. And it was doing it in a very violent way. So I had to protect myself. I think at some point, John felt he had to protect himself. And so at the opening of this book, there were some concerns there. And then later on, the concerns resurfaced again.
Right. And I was going to bring that up as well, because there was even, I think, a picture was able to be taken of the entity near John. And then in a way, I think it, John had snapped about it basically when he had gotten back in the vehicle. And when I read that, I was kind of like stunned, like, why is he snapping? Like, it's just, it was very shocking, because I wondered if maybe it had tried to possess him, or, it had done something, because he seemed extremely angry over just that simple question. And even he kind of was just like, he didn't like the way he felt. But yeah, it was very... Go ahead.
It was starting to unravel them. And that's the bad part about these things, Bernadette. is that not only is it trying to scare them, it's also trying to drive them apart. And his nerves were frayed. He needed to put closure on a case because the owners, for one, were pressuring him and pressuring the crew to keep coming back and get the job done. And he couldn't really record much of anything at all to prove to them what was happening other than what he himself was experiencing and what some of the crew was experiencing. So what you're seeing there is the combined stress of it all, on top of the fact that that creature was really pushing them to be driven apart, which, in some ways they were strong enough as a team that it didn't happen.
And do you think maybe whatever from his, the case that was open that chose not to write about, whatever kind of tried to attach itself, do you think it made its way to the house in Unholy structure somehow and just kind of egged those entities on as well?
Good question. I mean, I have no idea. I don't know. He's never mentioned that to be a fact. I think that once they let go of one case, they kind of like just physically and mentally not try to think about it. They remain concerned about the people because I'm sure they're frustrated to some degree that they weren't able to help them resolve it. This one was a very frustrating case for him, but he was glad the owners decided, okay, we're just going to sell it. But then the person who's selling it, did they even get the disclosure? What was happening to it?
Yeah, that's the thing you have to wonder, because I know New York it's some kind of law where if you've had a haunting or something in the house, that you have to tell the people who are buying it, either someone's passed away in the house or you've had something. I'm not sure if Pennsylvania has that.
Yeah.
So
Right.
who knows? But that it would be interesting to kind of go back and at least maybe snoop and see if they were trying to remodel or something. I would be interested in like a sequel to this book. I think I really do. I think anyone who reads it would be interested, because I'm very nosy. I'm not going to lie, I'm a very nosy person. So, I mean, I would like to know where the antiques ended up. I'm just nosy. So,
yeah.
But
well, it should be interesting to see if he ever gets reassigned. I mean, what they would do to see whether it was followed through, whether the historical society did come in, whether they at least, notified people who might be related to these people. I mean, they found bodies in the basement. So, I mean, someone had to identify them, give them a proper burial. And those things, it was like just cut off. It was like, okay, you're done. Thank you for your results. Goodbye.
Oh my God. So he doesn't even know if they had exhumed the bodies or taken them out yet?
No, he has not been back to the area from what I understand. I know he went back to the other case because he, was very concerned for the family. But I don't think he has been reassigned or gone back since the book was finished.
Right. So there was a comment that says, I'm not going to say the name because I'm not going to butcher it. If Vincent wants to put them up. The law was based on the Ghostbuster ruling in New York. A few states enforce it. I'll just start so he can put it up, because I do not want to butcher anyone's name.
Okay.
So that's the law we were talking about. There it is.
Oh, in New York. Yeah.
There was a house, I remember reading about it. It was really big news a couple years ago that like this family had bought a really haunted house, and the previous owners knew it was haunted, and they just want nothing to do with it, so they sold it. Basically, it's your problem to take it. And then this new family was like, what the heck? And then they sued the I think the realtor as well as the family they bought it from. So then that's basically the law. So I'm not sure if Pennsylvania enforces that.
Yeah, and this house actually is not in Pennsylvania. I can't disclose where it is. I wish I could. I still have the picture here on my cell phone of the.
I thought it was in Pennsylvania. I'm sorry.
No, he's from Pennsylvania, but he goes to adjacent states to investigate. And I think that one of the things that kind of like intrigued me is that my own grandmother's house, which was incredibly infested with almost every room had some kind of apparition or some kind of, things would fall off, the bookcase, things of that nature. After they sold it, when my grandmother passed away and people had moved out of the house, someone came in and built a totally new house in that spot. Would you believe that they have not experienced anything at all since they've been living there?
See, I wonder why, and I also wonder if it doesn't go back to like the stuff going into the wood, into the house itself, and creating like a life force within the house. Because that kind of proves that theory in a way from what
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, that
Mm-hmm.
they destroyed the old house, they put up this new house and this new structure. There's nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That really is.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you want to tell everyone where they can find you, where they can find your books?
Okay, probably the fastest way to find me is through social media. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. Not so much on Twitter because I don't know what's going on with Twitter, but
I'm not on there either. I don't like Twitter at all
um,
because it's just like, yeah.
I'm on Instagram and I'm also on TikTok. I do go on TikTok quite a bit just to say hello, and I'm live on there. Sometimes I share that on Facebook, but I also have a website which is under my name, Anna Maria Manalo author.com. People, please free to message me if you want to on Facebook and share a story or two. Who knows? I might be compiling another anthology of stories. I do have a couple of other books that are coming. One is about a girl who became a witch. The next one that's coming up is about a ufologist and an experiencer. Um, and we really don't know what the entity is at this point. So there's a couple of things cooking.
But it looks like it's going to be a great book, and I'm excited about it. I'm very excited. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. I truly appreciate it. I hope you'll come back when your new book comes out, or just come back in general. So,
Okay.
because I've really loved having you. I know everybody else really loved you. So I'm going
Well,
to
thank
thank
you
you
so
again.
much. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's a delight to talk to you, Bernadette.
Oh, it was wonderful talking to you too. No, thank you so much again. You have a good night.
Good night.
Bye. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking around, and thank you for being here. I truly appreciate it. So next week we are going to have a bunch of great shows. Vincent will be on Wednesday night at 11 o'clock with V, and he'll be doing a report show. Friday, Lon will be on at 9 p.m., and he will have Steve Stockton as his guest. And I will be on at 11, and my guest will be Tobias Wayland. We're going to kick off the holiday season with some Christmas high strangeness and some different stories that you're going to love. And then coming December 23rd, we're going to have our very first Phantoms and Monsters Christmas show. So I hope you guys will stick around and watch that. Have a good night and a great weekend. Bye, everyone.